We have so much stuff to talk about right now in the NBA, and I just kind of felt like putting it all together in one video. So whoever said like a week ago that all I do is make 8-minute videos, this is gonna be like 2.5 videos for you. There's a ton of stuff that I'm super excited to talk about today, but I'm gonna begin with Magic Cavs Game 7 because it literally just happened yesterday. This game was kind of out of control. In the first half, it felt like we were watching the end of the Donovan Mitchell era in Cleveland in real time. That second quarter was dark. Like there were times that you looked down at the scoreboard and thought, is this the middle of the first quarter or is it actually the middle of the second quarter? Because the scoring for Cleveland was so bad. The Magic were actually able to hit some threes in the first half, which was extremely helpful for them. They were up 15 at one point in the first half, up 18 later on in the second quarter as well. And unfortunately for them, all that meant was it resulted in the largest blown lead in Game 7 playoff history. I'm gonna be honest, I just assumed that there was a Game 7 comeback that was larger than 18. The fact that there's never been a 20-point Game 7 comeback is kind of shocking to me. And if you want to talk about the Magic, to me, the story is just the opposite ends of the spectrum for each of their star players. Paolo in the first half was awesome. He was getting to the free throw line all game long. By the end of the game, the Cavs really started to focus in on him because Jalen Suggs couldn't hit a shot, Franz Wagner couldn't hit a shot, and it just made things so much more difficult for him. A lot more turnovers, couldn't hit a shot from the field, was only able to get to the free throw line, but it's clear that, I mean, he's 21 years old. Like, this guy is going to be a problem in the league for a long time. In a league that felt increasingly dominated by on-ball guards that were creating everything in ball screens, like what we saw for the Cavs tonight with Donovan Mitchell, having a like combo forward kind of guy in Paolo that could really be anything moving forward. If he improves as a passer, improves as a shooter, I could see him being one of the best players in the entire league, and that was showcased in this game. Unfortunately for Franz Wagner, it was also showcased in the opposite direction for him. There are going to be some question marks in Orlando this offseason in terms of what the long-term outlook looks like for Franz alongside Paolo, because I went into this series, and I've said it in multiple videos, I went into this series thinking they're good with those two guys in terms of creators, in terms of primary offensive options. Paolo, Franz, those are the two guys. They need spacing. They need a legitimate five that would play more than 10 minutes on any other team in the playoffs. They need help around those guys. Those guys themselves are fine. Paolo, I feel really good about. Franz, all the road games in this series, he was terrible. I mean, this is the worst single Game 7 shooting performance from any high volume shooting player ever. Like, no one has ever shot this many shots and shot this poorly in a Game 7 ever. And it's crazy too because like at home, Franz has been really good. Just on the road in this series has been so bad for him. And it's been a thing all year long for him. He'd been a decent shooter the first couple years of his career. This year he shot under 30% from three, and after the All-Star break, it was even worse. And if you're thinking about long-term fits alongside Paolo, someone that can't shoot alongside him is just not going to be an option for you. Like, I'm thinking about how can they add a player at the five that can guard and then can also shoot, much less the fact that their other primary scoring guy isn't going to be an off-ball spacer in Franz. Now, it feels dramatic to start getting mad at Franz because the Magic lost the series because they weren't really supposed to win it. There was a lot more pressure on Cleveland. Cleveland had Game 7 at home, and yes, it sucks to blow this lead on the road in a Game 7. It sucks that Franz played the way that he did, but overall, I still think Orlando has a really bright future, which we'll talk about here in a second. Because I also want to talk about what could have been for the Cleveland Cavaliers. If they didn't make this comeback in this game, I think we were watching Donovan Mitchell's last game as a Cleveland Cavalier. That might be the case regardless, but it was definitely going to be the case if they lost this game because the entirety of the game, even the fact that they won, the entirety of the game, it felt like Donovan Mitchell was the only guy out there that was doing anything for Cleveland. Like, yes, Isaac Okoro was guarding decently well. Evan Mobley was getting some blocks at the rim. But in terms of scoring output, Game 6 and Game 7 was just Donovan Mitchell, and that's it. Like, Max Strus hit some shots a little bit in Game 7, but he was the only one creating. He was the only one scoring. Didn't look particularly healthy. It looked like he was exhausted for both Game 6 and Game 7, by the way, but it just didn't matter. And I put this out there. Someone got mad at me for talking about, Donovan Mitchell trades when they just won the game. Like, yes, that might seem weird that the Cavs just won this Game 7. I'm talking about, oh, nice audition for Donovan Mitchell as a trade piece. I don't know that this really changes the destiny of the Cavs offseason. I still think they're going to lose to the Celtics pretty convincingly in the second round. They might win a game. They might win 2 games. But at no point, I don't think, are we going to really entertain the possibility that the Cavs could actually win the series, even without Kristaps Porzingis. The Celtics are just too good. And so we're just kind of delaying the inevitable by one series. And honestly, how the first round series went for Cleveland might have actually made it even more clear to Donovan Mitchell that it might be time for him to dip. And it also should make it clear to the other teams around the league that, like, if you have a chance to get this guy and he says he's going to re-sign an extension when he gets on your team and you trade for him, make the deal, because this guy is out of control. Like, it's been a little bit, but this is just another reminder of how great Donovan Mitchell can be as an individual scorer in the playoffs. So now let's do Magic offseason, Celtics Cavs preview, and then we'll move on to some other topics as well. Okay, so In terms of the Magic this offseason, I've talked about this in some of the other videos as well. I think they're a really interesting Klay Thompson team as a spacer alongside Franz and Paolo. Like, spacing has to be the number one priority for them. Like, they don't need anybody else on the team that can only guard or can only drive. They need floor spacers around Franz and Paolo. And even though individually they aren't the most efficient players ever, they're also 22, 21 years old and operating in arguably the worst spacing offense in the entirety of the playoffs, yet they still managed to win, 47 games and get to a game 7 in the first round against a Cleveland team that is obviously much more experienced than them in the playoffs. There's going to be some pipe dream scenarios of trying to go get someone like Paul George or something, but more realistically, someone like Klay, or trading for a legitimate 5 like Capella, or bringing in a shot-creating guard like Anthony Simons that can work on or off the ball alongside Paolo and Franz. Those are priorities for the Magic. They're young. They have salary cap space to spend this offseason before they have to sign Paolo and Franz to any kind of extensions, and I expect them to use that salary cap space. Now, there are going to be conversations today. People are going to be talking about, should they trade Franz? Is he the long-term answer alongside Paolo? Let's let the guy see if he can figure out how to shoot some jump shots first before we start making that decision. Just remember where your expectations were for Orlando at the beginning of the season and where their season ended up before you start talking about, hey, maybe it's time for Franz to dip. And then quickly looking forward at Cavs Celtics, I'm always going to be a little bit afraid, if I'm a Boston fan, of just a crazy Donovan Mitchell game, stealing a game on the road in Boston. And then the Cavs obviously have been good at home so far in the postseason. But there's obviously question marks in the front court with the Cavs in terms of, is Jared Allen going to play? Is he not going to play? Are they better when they only have one big out there? Is Darius Garland going to show up to any of these games? Now, to be fair, I think people were being a little bit harsh to Darius Garland. He had a lot of stuff going on during the year, broke his jaw, couldn't eat solid food, lost like 15 pounds. He's been terrible, and I've said it as well in that first round series, but I don't want to be too harsh about it. If I had to guess right now, even without Kristaps Porzingis, presumably the entirety of the series, I'm going to say Celtics in 5, where the Cavs get one either at home or on the road because Donovan Mitchell just drops like 45 on somebody. All right, now we got to talk about the Anthony Edwards game, game 1 against the Nuggets, where the Timberwolves actually take the lead in the series on the road in Denver. An important point to make here before we talk about Anthony Edwards, before we talk about anything. This is the first time when Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, Nikola Jokic, these guys have been healthy and playing, that they have ever trailed in a playoff series with those 3 guys on the team. Now, it's cheating a little bit because you could also just say, hey, they're 20-6 or 20-7 or whatever in the last 2 playoffs with those 3 guys, because really the only time they've been healthy with all 3 of those has been the last 2 postseasons, because 3 postseasons ago was when they added Aaron Gordon, Jamal Murray got hurt, and then 4 postseasons ago was the bubble and Aaron Gordon wasn't on the team. But still, this version of the Nuggets has never trailed in a playoff series until Anthony Edwards came along. And there's some really lofty praise out there right now about Anthony Edwards. People are talking about MJ, Kobe comparisons. I see a little bit more like Dwayne Wade stuff with him, especially if we get a lot of early career success for him, where, you know, maybe they win the title this year. Like, that actually is a much more interesting D Wade comp to me than anything else, but obviously much better shooter, and Wade came in the league much older than Anthony Edwards did. But just an unbelievable game for Ant. And this was the question mark, it felt like, for Minnesota coming into the playoffs and coming into this series. It felt like the team was good enough. It felt like they matched up well against Denver with their size, with their length. They had scoring, they had shooting, they had everything you'd want to try and take down the Nuggets. The question was, are they ready for this? And more specifically, is Anthony Edwards ready for this? And I think it's pretty clear that, yeah, he'll be okay. I actually didn't screenshot this in preparation for the video, but I'm remembering it now, so let's put it up here. This is 100% going to happen, or should happen, in Team USA. Anthony Edwards is going to look at these guys, look at kind of the leaders of the team, these guys that came back to make another run of the gold medal, and he would be absolutely correct in saying this. And just because the Timberwolves won game 1 doesn't mean that they're automatically going to win the series. I mean, there's a reason that we were afraid of the Nuggets for the Timberwolves going into the series, because they have that championship experience. It feels like even when they don't play well, especially at home, they're still able to win these games. It was impressive the way that Minnesota was able to finish it out, but the Nuggets can still absolutely be a problem. They got to figure out a way to get Jamal Murray going, but this was certainly about Anthony Edwards. Another thing too I want to throw up here, because some people have been commenting on my Tim Connolly video from 2 years ago, I think, when they made the Rudy Gobert trade. Yeah, he's done a good job. I didn't like the Gobert trade. I didn't think that it made sense for them. I didn't like Gobert as a long-term asset. They gave up a ton. I honestly still kind of believe they gave up too much, but you can't really argue with the results right now. I would argue that this is more about Anthony Edwards than it is about Tim Connolly and the Gobert trade, but obviously Gobert being on the team has been unbelievable for them, and it is interesting that he went from the Nuggets, where they won a title after he left, and then now he goes to the Timberwolves, gets equity in the team and a ton of money to build that team. And even though it didn't go great last year because of injuries, now they look like the team that could possibly take down the defending champs. Of course, all this can literally change in like 3 days, and maybe the Nuggets look awesome in game 2 and game 3, but we'll see. And it's interesting as well, because we've had a lot of conversations lately about what is the future of the league truly going to look like after, you know, some of these guys that I mentioned right here, KD, Steph, all these guys, LeBron, all these guys retire? What's the future of the league gonna look like? Like, we haven't had an NBA without those guys at the front of it, in LeBron's case, 20 years, right? Well, I think we're going to be okay. Like, in this tweet, I put Paolo in there, and the only reason I put it in there is because it was during the first half of the Cavs game, and Paolo was having an unbelievable performance. Realistically, there's obviously much more guys that could be the potential face of the league moving forward than just Ant and Paolo. I feel like amongst the really young guys, Ant is, of course, in pole position for that title. But regardless, being concerned about, if you're going to be concerned about anything right now in the NBA, the talent level of the young players, the young stars in this league, is absolutely not an issue. Now, if you want to talk about the combination of charisma, popularity, end of game heroics, and overall, you know, athleticism and just game, it's Anthony Edwards. Like 1000%, it's Anthony Edwards. Now, things can always change, but that's the guy. It's interesting as well. I saw this one today when I was preparing to make the video. No disrespect to this person. I understand what they're saying, but they pointed out a scouting report for Anthony Edwards at the time of the draft, and basically saying, like, this is a terrible scout. Why am I ever going to trust a scout again? Because Anthony Edwards turns out to be this guy, the guy that we've seen in this Nuggets series. Well, one or two things. One, this is actually a really good scout. Like, for Anthony Edwards out of college, this paragraph is perfect. Like, this is exactly the kind of prospect that he was. And the part I couldn't fit in the screenshot was people were complaining because I think there was like a Victor Oladipo comp, Dion Waiters comp, and that's what they were complaining about. Well, one, as I mentioned here, this was the 2020 draft, which, like, good luck trying to scout the 2020 draft. Looking at you, James Wiseman. Like, that class was impossible to scout. Didn't have the full college season, virtual interviews over Zoom. The fact that they got this right, the Timberwolves, that is incredible. And also, Ant has improved as much in his first couple of seasons in the league as any player that arguably we've seen in the last 20 years. So just a reminder, scouting the draft is hard. It's important to point out when you're right, and it's also important to point out that, like, a lot of things can change after a couple of seasons. But if you can believe it, there's actually a ton of other stuff still happening in the league outside of just these playoff series, outside of the face of the league conversation, because the Clippers lost, by the way. Congrats to the Mavs for getting to the second round. We've got a very interesting Mavs OKC series that I kind of want to wait to see play out before I really speak on it in a video. But I do want to talk about the Clippers offseason, because I thought about preparing a video for them, assuming that they would lose in Game 6. But I really want to take some time and think about exactly what I thought the offseason might look like, and it doesn't look good. So the obvious part of this is another disappointing season for the Clippers. They've got to deal with possible coaching changes with Ty Lue. Maybe he does or doesn't want to come back. I'm not sure. And then you've got James Harden and Paul George as free agents. And it's interesting because given the way the end of the season went, with Kawhi not being healthy, if you could pick any of these guys to be free agents this offseason, if you're the Clippers, you would probably pick Kawhi because he's the one that's not healthy. He's the one that's not playing. But they actually have Kawhi signed to an extension from a couple of months ago, but they don't have Paul George and James Harden signed. Now, if they want to give James Harden a max, James Harden's going to be a Clipper next year. Like, the whole reason he wanted to go to the Clippers was, yes, to try and compete, but also he wanted the giant contract, and he felt like that was the last place he was going to be able to get it as the Clippers move into a new building and want to make sure that they have a good competitive team next year. I think Paul George is like kind of a legitimate flight risk now. I think there's like a 15 to 20% chance that he goes to Philadelphia, for example. Like, I don't know if he's actually going to leave LA. It still seems unlikely. I'm not saying it's a coin flip by any means, but it is a real possibility. And you can say what you want about the Clippers underperforming this year, losing Paul George in free agency for absolutely nothing with a roster that's already expensive, even without bringing it back, going into a new building next year, which with a team that doesn't have any control over their future draft picks until 2030, would be a absolute disaster. You could argue about, oh, well, maybe they shouldn't give him the full 5-year max extension because he's going to be hurt. Sure, you can talk about that if you want to, but you know what else you need to think about? The Clippers basketball team next season. There's no scenario where they can tear this down, get draft picks, and figure it out later. They've already full-on committed to this group, and that includes the Kawhi extension. So at this point, they've got to try and bring back Ty Lue. They've got to try and bring back Paul George and tell themselves the same, probably lie, they've told themselves for 3 years now that, man, if we can just get healthy, maybe this is our year. But realistically, that's like the only thing they can do. Like, when you look at their cap sheet, when you look at their future draft picks, their options include run it back or suck. That's it. And there's no incentive to be bad because they don't have their picks. You could argue about how they got themselves in that situation, but to argue now that it would be okay if Paul George left makes absolutely no sense. Speaking of free agency, interesting Jimmy Butler rumors coming out right now in Miami. I talked about this in their offseason video. He could be a 2025 free agent. There's two things happening here. One, Miami could just let that ride, let Jimmy Butler get to 2025 free agency as a player option he can pick up or decline. He could technically be a 2026 free agent if he wanted to, but most guys, when they get to this point in their career, they want to decline the option and get another big contract, assuming that Jimmy's really good again next year. Or they could sign him to an extension this offseason. It's been discussed, it's been thrown out there that he, just declines that option in 2025, and they give him another 2 or 3 years to take him through 2027 or 2028 or something in his new contract on a big number. Seems like maybe Miami might have other ideas though, whether it be in a trade this offseason, whether it be letting him walk in free agency, whether it be just waiting it out on the extension and not immediately signing him. There's just some very interesting rumors happening right now in Miami. And we know that Jimmy Butler has no issue being like, oh, I'm offended. I don't like how this is being handled. I'm out. I don't want to be here anymore. I'm leaving in 2025. Trade me. Like, that's a small possibility, but it feels like a real one. And I'm not saying necessarily that it would be a bad idea for Miami to explore what their post-Jimmy Butler era looks like. But if your goal is to try and compete for a title next year or the following, Jimmy Butler's on the basketball team because you're just not going to get as much in a trade for him as you would just his value on the floor, assuming he's healthy, in terms of immediate title contention. If you want to have the Bam Tyler Hero era in Miami plus whatever you get in exchange for Jimmy, sure. But like if you're trying to compete for a title, he's got to be on the team next year. Two more things. And honestly, I thought about leading the video with this part because it's just so funny. The Lakers need a new coach. They got rid of Darvin Ham. That's not the funny part. The funny part is JJ Redick, LeBron's podcast partner, is a candidate for the Lakers head coaching job. Can someone point out to me when it has been a really good idea to hire a successful former young NBA player as your coach when they've never been a head coach before? Where has that ever worked? It's happened twice with the Nets, with Steve Nash and Jason Kidd. Both were a disaster. Kidd's fine now in Dallas, but with their initial team, disaster. I like JJ Redick. It's interesting that his name is involved here. Like, could you imagine being LeBron's teammate and the head coach of the basketball team is LeBron's podcast partner? Like, what does this mean for the future of the podcast? And some other names been thrown out there as well. Like if Ty Lue ends up not wanting to coach the Clippers, which seems like a real possibility, Ty Lue could show up to the Lakers. I actually really like that for them. I think that's the best case scenario for them this offseason from a coaching perspective is to bring in someone like Ty Lue. But the Redick thing is interesting because at first I was all in on the podcast. I was like, oh, this is really cool. I like the info they're coming out with. But now it's like JJ is on this like tour of defending LeBron and saying that the league was weak when MJ was in the league. And like, that's not really the point of the whole coaching search situation, but it's just weird how you get associated with LeBron and then all of a sudden you're a candidate for the Lakers head coaching position and you're like defending him in terms of his historical value. Speaking of coaches though, I just mentioned this guy a second ago. Jason Kidd, contract extension with the Dallas Mavericks, fresh off a first round series win against the Clippers. Congrats to Jason Kidd. It's funny to me, the general idea that I have of Mavs fans though is that they're waking up this morning, seeing the news about Jason Kidd getting an extension and being like, don't love that. Like, you can say what you want about Jason Kidd as a coach, and there's going to be a lot of opinions on whether he's good or he's not, whatever. All I'm saying is from Mavs fans, of which I hear from all the time, it doesn't feel like they love the idea of Jason Kidd continuing to be the head coach of the team. Now, it's easy to constantly be frustrated. When you're one of these teams that's like kind of right on the edge of maybe competing but not quite there, the coach is always the first place you're going to point to and blame, right? But it's just funny because you see them win a series, coach gets a contract extension. You would assume everybody would be happy. I'm not sure that's the case with Mavs fans this morning. Well, if you made it to this point in the video, thank you. I appreciate you. Leave a like if you enjoyed it. You can subscribe to the channel if you like. Let me know what you think about this style of content, going much more, longer form, thinking about longer videos, thinking about like days and days of news recapped in one video. Let me know. We're just trying stuff. That's what we're doing right now on the channel. So I would appreciate your feedback. See you next time.